And good evening. I am Richard Dietering, your neighborhood archaeologist, your dusty old friend, everything else that goes along with that. And my assistant, Alyssa,
Hi,
who
everyone. Good evening.
got,
Um,
got to pick tonight's subject.
I did get to pick tonight's subject, and it was exciting to be able to talk about. If there's any issues with audio or anything like that, we are doing something new this evening. So give us a shout and let us know if there's any issues going on in the chat there, please.
Yeah. In other words, if you can't hear us, you didn't hear her just say, tell us in chat, which would hopefully mean that you would tell us in chat that you couldn't hear us. So, are we coming through?
Yeah, put the camera down.
Okay. So tonight we're going to be talking about navigation systems. Last summer, Alyssa and I had a chance to go meet a wonderful gentleman who is a navigator. And we talked quite a bit about solar navigation at that time. He is of the opinion that if someone sailed over here, it would have been only in the daytime and using only solar navigation, which, Alyssa, I disagreed with that almost immediately.
Absolutely.
And said, well, they were navigating night and day because you can't just can't literally give up the ship at nighttime just because, or throw an anchor out just because you're not in daytime.
I don't think anchors were reaching the bottom of the ocean. That's for sure.
Not in most places. So
not in those times either.
Right. And the thing of it is they did have nighttime navigation. At least that is our thesis, is that they had nighttime navigation. And I think we have enough to comfortably stand by that with the Minoans.
Okay.
The Minoans were expert sailors.
Right.
That's the one thing they were really good at is sailing everywhere, anywhere they wanted to go. But how did they do it? They had to navigate.
Well, yeah, and navigation wasn't just was really a system that they had to create. It wasn't just a skill that they had.
Right.
It was
They didn't sail on a hunch.
No, absolutely not.
And it's not something that they came by slowly. It's they were sea people, and they would travel, and this would require ships to be out in the water all days or all times of the day.
Right. And it wasn't one thing like you said, they didn't just go on a hunch. It wasn't one thing that they just guessed and then they did it. They were really cross-checking those references on what needed to be done.
Yeah.
So obviously we had night navigation with
Yeah.
being celestial or star navigation. What else did we have?
Well, let's talk about that for a bit, just the star navigation, before we jump to something else. Unfortunately, there's I'm kind of mad at you for picking this subject, because there is part of our research that I cannot come out public with yet.
Right.
And it has everything to do with star navigation, right? But we can't come public with it because we're trying to
controversial. We also need to
get permission to research certain things, but it has to do with solar navigation. But we also know that there are unexplained structures throughout the world that do amazing things when it comes to pointing directions.
Right.
And a lot of them point directions based on the stars, more around the equinoxes, the summer and the winter equinox.
The equinoxes,
or not equinox, the solstice,
the solstices,
and the equinoxes too.
Well, yeah.
And then you have the Great Pyramid of Giza that points directions too. Not so much a solar thing, except it would have pointed to the true North Star, which, by the way, folks, back at the time period we're talking about, the North Star was not the North Star.
No, the North Star was
Thuman.
Which, based on Earth wobble and things like that, that's why that shifted.
Yeah, and that's not guessed. I mean, that's been proven. Thuman was our it was part of the Dragon constellation.
Right. And we actually took a look. Oh goodness, what museum were we at? What planetarium?
Oh boy, we've been to a few. It was either University of Michigan or it was over at Cranbrook. Yeah, I think it was.
I think this happened at the
U of M.
Yep,
it was.
I had my
he called his professor.
Yeah,
and his professor said, "Of course it is going to be different."
Right. But we had walked up to the person running the planetarium and running the projector system, and we said, "Can you type in 3000 BC?" And he's like, "Well, I don't have AD or BC." was like, can you put a negative in front of it?
Can we please go back to negative 3,000?
Yes.
And
And it worked. And
yeah, and what I was trying to find is where would the North Star Polaris be at that time during the solstice.
right.
And when he was shocked to see a huge change in it. But what we found was Thuman was our North Star. We had a new North Star for navigation. And all of a sudden, it started making a whole lot of sense out of places like uh, Stonehenge and out of places like Isle Lewis in Scotland, which we're going to be going there within the next couple of years. And we got so much research to do. It's hard to tell. I want to go tomorrow. And well, everyone's telling me I can't. So, but then we got research in Arizona. We have to do. We have research in Alabama.
that
We
we
have
need
to
to
do
do.
research up north. We still have to dig in. There's so many places around the world, and I'm diversing. But the North Star and everything else, we needed to be able to figure out if some of the stuff that we have that always seemed to be off by just a few degrees.
Right.
Why was it off by just a few degrees? And come to find out, Earth wobble, as you brought up, changed everything. So once you take that into consideration, every one of these methodologies that we talk about with north or with star navigation
Stars going north.
makes sense now. All of a sudden, everything lines up, and we say they could have navigated by the stars with what some of the structures that we find already there.
Right.
And one of our researchers that we're going to be doing at Isle Lewis is checking out all the GPS locations of all the standing stones on the island, and then line them up with the stars going back to 3,000, anywhere from 2,000 to 3,000 BCE.
Right.
And I think what we're going to find is that they align up with stars based on solstice and equinoxes, both. And here's the thing, and this is, I talked to you a little bit about this before. I truly believe that the places like Stonehenge, they're stationary. They don't move, right?
Right.
They would be perfect navigational points to calibrate your tools for any specific time of the year. I mean, they're set up. You got where the solstice is, so you can go there now. Let's say 2 months after the solstice. Say this is where the solstice was 2 months ago. It lined up right through these stones right here. Now we've looked, they're on this stone. So now you can calibrate your navigational tools to the new markers based on the month you're in or the part of the season you're in.
Okay.
And so they were there more for collaboration. If you remember when we were talking with Mr. DeGrasse, wonderful man, by the way, out in Maine, he pointed out something very important, and that was the beach marking.
Not beach marking. What's the word he used for that? The word he used,
But it was line of sight based on the beach.
right. Shoreline mapping.
Yeah, shoreline mapping. And with that, because the curvature of the Earth, sorry folks, there is a curvature to the Earth. The Earth is not flat. All right.
Right.
So within 6 miles of the shore, all of a sudden the shoreline starts coming in. And as you get closer to that shore, you can start mapping the shoreline. You look for tall things, and all of a sudden, like on Isle Lewis, you can start looking for upright stones coming up over the horizon. And you can start mapping them so you know, all right, somewhere around here are these stones. Now you can find them to go and calibrate your direction to your next point. And then after you do that, you start getting close to your next point, and then you start shoreline mapping again. What comes up next?
What other stones and things like that do we think are used for navigational purposes?
Well, we know, you and I can sit here and we can talk about Stonehenge. Mm-hmm. We can talk about Isle Lewis, which they call the Stonehenge of the North. We can talk about Stonehenge America, which is in New Hampshire.
USA.
Or Stonehenge USA, which is in New Hampshire. Costa Rica.
There's the round,
those big round stones. It was really neat when I took you to the museum and I said, I got to find, there's one thing I have to show you, and it's just a picture. And it's just a picture of a round rock. And you kind of looked at me like I was nuts, and you were probably right. But we found this great big picture of this big round rock. Right. And if you check out these stones with Costa Rica, there was a bunch of them laid out in different lines. And if you draw lines, what we will call infinite lines from those storms on the lines that they start creating,
Right.
one takes you right through the point of the Great Pyramid of Giza. Another one's going to take you right through the solstice stones of Stonehenge. Another
Okay.
one's going to take you straight to Easter Island, which is amazing. Easter Island got these great big giants there, all looking up. And by the way, if you start aligning those stones, I think you'd be amazed at what would. And that's one of the
Well,
things that
and
we're looking
mind
at
you,
doing.
looking at Easter Island, Easter Island's one of the most isolated places on Earth.
Yeah, and yet there was directions on how to get there. You could
Well,
get there from Costa Rica.
Yeah, fully settled.
Right.
Fully, like full civilization.
Right. How did the people get there?
Right. They didn't drift there by accident. That
No,
was definitely on purpose.
they didn't swim there.
Right. That's for sure.
So they had to float there to get there, right? And they probably went there according, maybe they went there to look for canaries. I don't know, but yeah. So the stones in Costa Rica all draw perfect lines to other sites that you would use to calibrate your navigational tools.
Now, what's one site that isn't necessarily a rock formation structure or a structure that was built that directly involves our research that these stones also pointed to?
Oh, Isle Royale.
Right. So obviously we believe that there was copper extraction out of Isle Royale in ancient times, and we know that there was.
Well, we know there was. And the question is folks, we have a book coming out that Liz and I spent a lot of time on this. And we'll be the first to admit that a theory is not proof, but we have strong conviction. And again, conviction isn't proof. Conviction is conviction. But we have strong conviction that the Minoans, because of how seaworthy they were, and because of their push for trade, would have very much had the possibility for traveling over here. And when you get little things that require an answer, I mean, there might be other answers, but you have questions like, how did a product that would only come from South America end up in a tomb in Egypt? Cocoa leaf. Right. How would that happen? How could tobacco, which was at that time, going back that many thousand years, only found in North America, the tobacco.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Would be found over in tombs in Egypt. And the Minoans didn't trade just bronze and copper; they traded everything. They had great big amphores where they would put plants and crops, corn. How did maize, American maize, end up over in Europe, in Egypt, and in the Levant?
Right.
So, yes, there's other explanations that you could go with. Maybe somebody was eating corn on the cob after they left the museum and dropped some in, and it just kind of like dried up there. Possibility, maybe, but the question that you get so much.
Back to our museum trip from a couple of weeks ago. What was in the hand of the
statue of the Mesopotamian sandstone?
Yeah,
corn.
Right, exactly.
Well, what you and I would say could very easily pass as corn. It looks more like corn than it does bread.
Right.
And but so we have these questions that leave the option open that maybe people of the Mediterranean came over here and traded. I mean, an axe said that very much is Mediterranean, found in the Amazon basin, in a tribe that for some reason carries DNA from Europe. Now, I'm not saying that they populated South America and it was, that South America actually is all Scottish people. This one tribe is represented with Scottish DNA, and they have Mediterranean, which is more that of the Minoan line. That you wonder how it made it over there.
Right. How did, whether intentional or unintentional? I mean, I don't think you're traveling that far unintentionally. So
we have these great traders that is learning how to travel from place to place to place, how to navigate.
Right.
From place to place to place. Some of the stuff that you have on your well-done notes here is one of the ways is they can go from memory. And that goes along with shoreline mapping. I know that shoreline, and at this shoreline, we've got to turn south, right?
Well, yeah. And memory is, to be honest, we underestimate the knowledge that they kept within their own brain.
Mhm.
I mean, even just looking at oral traditions and things like that of Native Americans in our area, that's all word of mouth. That's all remembrance from the brain. That's not, these
Right.
aren't written down everywhere.
And you bring up a good point. We have to point out that the indigenous people were already mining copper.
Oh,
All
absolutely.
right. So all of a sudden, you get people that are into trade, and they come over here, and they find this new people, and they're looking for things to trade, and they pop out copper to somebody that's very much involved in the bronze trade over in the Mediterranean. They're going to say, yes, of course we will trade something with you.
Right, right.
So, and that is, by the way, that's the only thing that could make trade even possible for the Minoans to come over here, is if they had somebody over here to trade with.
Right.
They would have to bring product over to here that would entice for the trade for more copper back, because we already had them mining it. It's called business.
Now, I guess I have a question for you. What remnants or artifacts have we found over here of stuff that might have been traded from the Mediterranean?
As you know, we find lots of commonalities. Again, a commonality in an artifact does not necessarily mean it is that. We don't have anything stamped saying made in Crete
Right.
over here. And that's one of the struggles that you and I have in our investigation.
Well, absolutely.
But we do find a lot of similarities in the art coming over here. The double-headed axe, for example, is a big thing in Crete. The bull iconography from Crete we find over here, especially with the Mandan tribe,
Yeah.
which is really big with bull icon. In fact, they have the bull dance. A lot of stuff that's in common with the Crete. Not saying that the Mandan tribe came from Crete, but I believe they definitely had interaction with them.
Yeah,
They're boats. They even call the bull boat.
some sort of diffusionism within
Right.
cultures.
Right. And I think we've got to be very careful when we talk about ours, that we're not taken away from the genius of the indigenous people.
No, absolutely not.
Beforehand, because they were already mining the copper when they came over here. They were already growing plants and living here.
Yeah, and I think
eating.
that's why maize and things like that have made it back into their cultures.
So once they find somebody to trade with, they have to remember how to get over here. And memory works maybe the first 2 times. Okay. But then they have to start putting up marker stones for this shoreline mapping. So we can go here. We can now generate, or we can calibrate our tools for following the stars to get us to the next place, and then
Right.
to the next place. What we'll call the stepping stones methodology of getting over here, which is one of the methods I say is very possible. Is the stepping stone procedure, where go to one place, calibrate to your next stone or stepping stone,
Okay.
go to another one, calibrate to the next stepping stone, go to another one.
Now, I know that there's not been a tool found of what they use to calibrate or anything like that yet. But what do we
Well,
believe?
don't say they didn't, but we can't get in that conversation. Thank you very much.
Well, I mean, we can't say for certain with
Not yet.
certainty
Not yet. We can't.
that we found anything that they can calibrate that with. But what would something like that have to entail?
Well, generally, what it's going to be is going to be lines within the tool itself, going back and forth. That once you line up to one star, it'll draw a line to another star.
Okay.
And kind of like some of the tools that they use today, it'll have an upright position that can start measuring it from the horizon.
Okay.
And so it's going to have to measure it from the horizon, and then it's going to have to measure latitude and longitude, back and forth, the up and down. And to calibrate to that, then you're going to have to say, okay, if I want to go to Newfoundland from Scotland,
Okay.
but the only way I have is to follow these stars right here on the solstice would take me straight from overhead. If I follow that star, it's going to take me right to Newfoundland. But now we're 2 months off from that. So the star has moved a bit. All right.
Okay.
Given that at the sundown situation. So now I'm going to say, okay, they're over there now. So I'm going to have to calibrate following that line, even though they've moved.
Okay.
So you're going to then make the shift to your next set of lines on your tool. That will take you now to the new stars that you're going to follow, and saying, okay, Now, because it's shift 2 months, now we're going to follow this star. And you'll get that by going to your stepping stones that have stuff like the, Stonehenge, in which you can align your tool to where the new stars are today.
Okay, so no different than like realigning. Okay, say I'm reading a message, a decoded message, and I'm using um uh the wheel with the letters that you can. Do you know what I'm talking
Yes,
about?
yeah,
Um,
but you're talking about a cipher wheel,
yeah,
and yeah, it works similar to a cipher
similar to a
wheel.
cipher wheel.
And my bet is they would be very much in a wheel shaped situation with a gear type running to where you would move it along the gear depending on the type of season.
Okay,
That would kind of realign to it also after you get your original setting off of your stepping stone location.
okay. And where do we believe that some of these stepping stone locations might have been?
Well, we mentioned a few. Stonehenge,
Okay, so those are the stepping
yeah,
stone locations that
yeah,
we're
those would
expecting.
be all over the world, and they're saying, well, yeah, but you just mentioned Costa Rica. But I also mentioned that, yeah, they found Minoan type axe head with bull iconography, and people with European DNA in an ancient tribe in Amazon. They got there somehow. They didn't swim. All right.
Right.
And my theory is that because the Minoans traded with everyone, one of the things that they would have traded for is labor, because back then the concept of bartering for trade or bartering for labor was very common. They would they would trade for slaves.
Right. And not necessarily, I mean, some of it was definitely slave work and things of that sort,
Yeah.
but there was also, just indentured servants
Well,
and all that
indentured
kind of stuff.
servitude is what they refer to as a slave, by the
Right.
way. And this is indentured servitude is all right. I've got a family of six. I've got strong arms, but I don't have any other means to provide for my family except for hard labor. And Pharaoh needs people with hard labor. I will go contract with him that he takes care of me and my family for the next 7 years, and I will work for him at whatever he needs my strong arms to do.
Right.
In comes the bartering people, the Minoans, is saying, "Hey, we can give you so much bronze, or so much corn, or so much this or that, pottery, whatever, oils, color purple." They were
Right.
big in making color purple, which was huge uh, as far as finance goes.
And then the
Um,
pharaoh could just say,
uh,
"Oh, well, I can pay you in here's this
why don't I give
labor."
you why don't I give you three of my indentured servants along with a little bit of gold?
Now, do we think these indentured servants ranged in skill sets and things like
Yes,
that?
yes. I think the indentured servants that they would have traded for would not have just been manual labor. Some of them would have had navigational background, possibly.
Okay.
Some of them, because we have to remember the coast of Africa. There's a lot of ocean there
Right.
where indentured servants would come from, as well as Europe. Um, and we do know from writings of Plato and stuff that there's a strong possibility that they made it up through past Spain and up along the coast of England and Scotland and around into Ireland and finding more of these stepping stones. Um, so you'd have indentured servants from all these areas that they would take with them. So this is how Scottish DNA makes it over to South America.
Right. And you don't, I mean, there's a lot of controversy and stuff like that behind Stonehenge being aligned to the solstice and not having any sort of navigational purpose.
Well,
What kind of outlook do you have on that controversy?
here's the thing. Stonehenge is old. It's not as old as some of the other stepping stones we have. And we'll
Right.
get into that in a second. And because it's been around for so many different centuries and through so many different cultures, it got used for different things. And people want to put a solitary mindset on it. The Druids used it for religious purposes. That's it. Boom. But it was around before the Druids. So what was it used for before the Druids? Well, it could have been used for a calendar for some of the ancient people on the land. Okay, it was used for a calendar. But could it have been used also for navigation? But why did they have to set up such an elaborate setup so big just to make a calendar? They could have done it on a much smaller scale in a garden, literally, uh, but they needed it to stand out. It needed to be visible from a distance. Why? So people that are coming through their stepping stone progress can say, "Oh, there it is," and start moving towards the Stonehenge as it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger as they
Okay.
approach it. It had to stand tall so people could recognize it. Today, we don't think much of seeing a church in a community with a steeple on it. But here in the Americas, the churches used to all have be the steeple. You know why?
So you could find the church.
So as you were approaching and you were looking for a town nearby, the first thing that would come up over the horizon is the steeple of the church. And if you saw the steeple of the church, you knew to follow that because there was a city there. There's an
Okay.
organization. It was always the tallest point in the community, and it would stand out. Now today, it doesn't. You have a little tiny church with
We have
skyscrapers all around.
skyscrapers all
Right.
around it.
So, but back in the 1800s, you have something that's 40, 50, 60 feet in the air, and it stands out like a sore thumb. And people that are traveling horseback can say, "We need to rest." And the first thing they start looking for in the distance is a steeple with a cross on the top. So they know that, all right, there's a church, there's a civilization, we can go there.
Right.
And some of the stepping stones, Stonehenge, and I mentioned Isle Lewis probably 3,000 times, which,
Right.
by the way, they think is about 3,000 years older than Stonehenge.
Oh, wow.
Why? And these are very tall, upright stones that are laid
Tall.
out.
Okay. So I'm not super familiar with Isle Lewis.
All right, well, you got a fancy little computer there, right?
Always.
All right, look up Isle Lewis, Lewis. And here we have all these standing stones in Isle Lewis. And I'm going to give her a chance. There it is.
Oh, wow. So it's very similar
Yeah,
to Stonehenge type feel.
but much older. And again, it's on an island, which would mean that as you approach, it's obviously man-made. It wasn't done by accident. It's not just a structure that happened by nature. So it would stand out as they approached it that, hey, we have a location we want over there.
Okay.
And with that, as the things are coming up, you're starting to find out it has some nighttime navigational purposes to it with the moon
Right.
and other items, which is
Now-
why it's so important that we get over there and GPS accurately all those stones and compare them to the solar alignments during the Minoan period. See if there's a tie.
Now, my question is when it comes to lunar alignments, that allows a little bit more as opposed to solstice alignments because you have 30-day calendar. You've got round the clock.
Well, even with the solstice type navigation, lunar always comes into it also.
Okay.
And what phase the moon is in becomes very important, and everything else. So when you're looking at the night sky, yes, it's forever changing, not just from day to day to day, but from hour to hour to hour to hour. Really neat picture for you to take at night. I know you love photography. Take your camera, put it on a long time exposure, set it outside, aim it at the North Star, and when you get your final picture in the morning, it's going to be a bunch of things going around, circles around it, right? So they move.
Okay.
Even through the night. So knowing comparing them to where the moon is at night, because that moon is kind of like a clock for you, kind of like a sundial, only at night. You can start judging based on where the moon is and where the stars is for direction.
That makes so when you're combining shoreline navigation, celestial awareness, and locations like Stonehenge and like Isle Lewis and like Easter Island and all of those things, it doesn't really feel like a coincidence anymore.
I would say it feels more like a possibility.
Okay.
And what we need, and I was just talking to a friend of mine who's an archaeologist, who, by the way, who doesn't agree with me on my thesis. He's not sure how everyone got to where they're at and everything else. And he knows they didn't swim, and he's more apt to believe that it was one single continent that just blew up, which I'm not saying that's wrong.
Right.
But he doesn't agree. And I said, what if we find that one tool that does measure, going back to 3000 BC, it does measure star alignment that you could use for navigation. He says if you found that, you would change the way we have to look at history from here on out,
Okay.
which is a big
Now,
deal to me because you know some of the investigations we're going into.
right. Now, we also have to look at what would a change like that bring to history in general.
It would change how we look at it. It would have to. All of a sudden, we would have to say that, especially over here, but I'm going to rephrase it a bit. Let's talk about over here first, but it's going to change the whole world, how we look at world history.
Okay.
Because all of a sudden we're saying there was influence. Now, people say, well, if you start talking about people coming over from the Mediterranean influencing the indigenous people, it's taken away their achievements. How about if the indigenous people influenced the Minoans
Right.
in some of the stuff they've done and some of the work they've done? Diffusionism isn't one directional.
No, it's both ways. It goes. It's a two-way street.
Yeah, and anyone who knows me knows I'm not what I refer to as hyper diffusionist. I
Correct.
don't believe that we had to come over here and help the poor indigenous people over here because they were too stupid to know how to take care of their lives when they were doing it even before they had the visitors come over.
Right. Right. And I mean, even if you look at when Christopher Columbus came over and when present day when Christopher Columbus came over,
In 1492, when he
sailed the ocean blue.
yeah,
we look there's stories of, I remember learning in elementary school, indigenous people taught them how to fish and hunt, where they taught them how
they did that with the Pilgrims.
Right.
Now Columbus, of course, he never made mainland, but
Right.
he was in the Caribbean, depends on how you want to say it.
It's Pirates of the Caribbean, but when you're talking about it, it's the Caribbean. It's the only acceptable terms.
It only if you're wearing a swimsuit on the beach, it's the Caribbean.
Okay.
If it's the movie, Caribbean.
Yes.
Got it. But that's as far as he made it, and then he had to deal with cannibals and wars and everything else. But the Pilgrims came over here. And you want to see a perfect example of diffusionism? Squanto. Squanto was trained in Europe. He was educated in Europe. He knew English very well. When the Pilgrims got over here, he was able to communicate with them because he was English trained. That's diffusionism. And what happens is when the Pilgrims get over there, Squanto said, these guys are in trouble. They're not going to make it. And he's right. They had a 50% kill off their first winter. The Pilgrims. And hardly any of the women made it. Most of the women died off because they didn't know how to deal with it. So Squanto says, hey, this is called corn or maize. This is called food. Here's how you grow it. Here's how you kill it. Here's how you eat it. Here's how you make it. And the Europeans that came over here were only able to survive just because they were taught diffusionism. And so we can't look at it as just a one-way direction type. And I kind of get choked up about this because a lot of people blame us that we're trying to take something away from the indigenous people.
We never, ever.
And actually, I'm trying to support their oral histories and the fact that they were doing remarkable things here.
Right. Which
even before the visitors that they talk about came over here. My goal is that maybe we can find out who those visitors were. Maybe.
Right. That would be the hope and the intention, is to understand, maybe even more of indigenous life because of it.
Yeah. And by the way, the indigenous people here knew how to navigate the land. Navigating the water
is one thing.
Is difficult, but navigating the land is also difficult.
Absolutely.
If you're going to get to point A to point B, it requires the same set of skills as far as getting to that point. Right. Is knowing how to follow the stars or follow the moon or follow the sun or follow whatever, and follow the shoreline maps, so to speak, or whatever. Yeah. It takes all the same skill sets to navigate
mapping the land is just as difficult as I think mapping the ocean is.
So I think they could have learned a lot.
Obviously, on the ocean, you can't stop what you're doing and just stop and draw. But it's I don't think there were ever any drawn out maps in the first place. I think it was all based
Mhm.
off word of mouth and based off what they could remember and what they could see.
Yeah, I'm sorry about my phone dinging, folks. I thought I had turned that off, but um, I didn't. So we've talked about navigation by star and lunar and shoreline, um, and solar. But they didn't just sail at night; they were sailing 24 hours a day. So when the sun came up, they weren't all of a sudden lost. They had to keep going, and a lot of this would be based on the sun, its location, and where it sat in the horizon, and or in the sun or in the sunrise, sunset, and it would give them an east and west and north and south.
Right. And we're not by any means saying everything's connected.
Actually, I think that is. I think we have to say that they had to transfer from nighttime navigation seamlessly into daytime navigation.
Okay.
They didn't have to stop and they didn't have to download a new program come morning, so they could.
Right. But what we're seeing is, across all these different parts of the world, we're seeing that they all had at least a baseline level understanding, or at least the same level of understanding of using the sky and direction and movement,
Yeah,
and the need
they
for it.
they found a set of gears and wheels that looks like a perfect computer in the Mediterranean, thousands of years old. If they could get the gears to work properly and turn, I think you'd find that it was actually a navigational tool. That is a guess. Just everyone's guessing on what this equipment is,
Right.
but it's a guess. But we know the Chinese had methodology of compasses.
Right. We're not saying any of this is necessarily proven. It's just
Do you know
there's
that
there's capability there.
children thousands of years ago could take a small piece of metal and float it on a cork or something in water? If they magnetized it, next thing they know, they'd find out that little needle would point all the time to what we know as true north.
Right.
And it's called a compass. It's not something new. It goes back a long time. China was using a compass at a remarkable period of time going back in time. Now, what if you have a group of people that are trading well into Asia? Dr. O'Shea, University of Michigan, brilliant archaeologist, um, discovered up around Hungary this village that did a lot of bronze. They were part of the Bronze Age, and yet they didn't have a single copper mine around them. Where did they get it from? Someone had to trade with them, right? Well, it doesn't take that much more to carry that trade a little bit further into China. They had bronze, they had copper. So the trade venue in that area went much broader than people really talk about, but everyone knows was there. They were trading. That's where
Right.
they get back and forth.
And if they had the
Marco Polo,
yeah,
you know, went to China and did some trading and everything else. And in fact, I would say it was probably the Europeans were the least brilliant of all the groups, because all the Chinese and all the other areas in India, they were already traveling and trading, people in the Mediterranean. It was the Europeans that were saying, oh, maybe we can go find something from these other people. And they were always looking for just another way around a place they've already been, around the coastline of Africa or India.
Right.
And they were finding great civilized people that were doing great things. The Persians were remarkable in the science. In the Levant, was again remarkable. And where did they get all this stuff unless you had a trade circle going on, someone heading
trade
up
circle, a trade route.
yeah, a trade routes, and there was only one seafaring people that was really really good at it. Right in the middle, stuck
Right.
on an island called Crete.
Were they really stuck on that island?
No, they weren't. They were
Exactly.
really good at getting off that
Yeah.
island. And so my question is, how good were they at getting off that island?
Yeah,
And they
absolutely.
developed navigational tools.
I mean, if they were able to navigate that precisely, There's no way they stayed within those
It,
limits.
it demands us to at least entertain the question.
Absolutely, it's definitely worth exploring.
And so, yeah, you had solar navigation, you had nighttime navigation. I noticed on your notes you had other things, currents. I mean, my last book is called Trade Winds for a reason. The trade winds and everything else, and the currents would carry you in trade in certain directions.
Well, we also have, different temperature changes and
Hmm.
being able to first off travel within those temperature changes.
Right?
Um, they kind of have to track everything, and I'm
Uh,
sure that they did.
Yeah, and they have to know when they're getting close to Greenland because it starts getting cold, and are they ready for it? But Greenland, I think we're going to find there's maps, by the way, of the poles, the North and South Pole. There are drawn maps, ancient maps of these lands with no ice on them.
Oh wow.
Yeah, so I mean, and you can pretty much see what the land masses look like at the time. What were things like before the different weather changes? Weather is constantly changing throughout. It goes through huge, major cycles throughout the centuries. We just got out of what we call the mini ice age that started in like the 13th century
Okay.
AD, just the dark ages. We're just coming out of that ice age. So yeah, things are seeming to warm up a little bit. They'll balance off, and then we'll get warm, and then we'll get another ice age. It's just the cycle that the world goes through. And you would need to know while traveling the different areas, what kind of weather it's going to bring.
Yeah, you
Um,
have to know what to pack.
yeah, you don't want to don't want to do something silly and hit an iceberg. Oh wait, someone did that. But um, so they had to know how to navigate in the weather. They had to know how to navigate different seasons. They had to know the land and the terrain that they were navigating to.
Well, yeah, and even we've talked a lot about night navigation. Not only do we have to, be able to map it and be able to figure out where we're going, we also have to make sure we're not hitting those obstacles. So we do have to have some knowledge of what's around us.
And know how to get back, because you always want to go back home, right?
Eventually.
Eventually. So yeah, they had the. We find now we just found some ships that were far off the coastline, so we know they didn't travel just the coastline.
Right.
We know that they went into deep water now. So they were brilliant sailors. Now the question is, as a brilliant people that loves the sea and loves sailing, how did they get around? How far did they go? And when you look at a society that is so bound by the bronze trade, and you have over across these stepping stones a society that has been mining some of the purest copper they've ever seen, what are the chances that they may have found these people and started trading? And that's what we're trying to find out.
Absolutely. And as always, we're always open to suggestions. We're always open to new information that maybe we haven't looked at one point.
Well, you are. I am so narrow-minded I can look through a keyhole with both eyes at the same time. But you keep me on track. So thank you for that.
we have to look at every angle of the opportunity. We have to look at every possibility, every contradiction. And that's a big part of our book, is looking at the contradictions and looking at the other possibilities.
We've got to be open-minded. I mean, I think the one thing that you said you appreciated me when we first started working together is how I'm actually out in the field. I spend as much time trying to prove I'm wrong than I do proving I'm right. Because if I can prove I'm wrong, then I know I'm on the wrong track.
Well, if he can prove he's wrong, then we're okay with that.
Yeah.
We're okay being wrong, and being wrong is absolutely
not
a bad thing.
Our goal is to find history.
Our goal is to find the truth.
Yeah, that's it.
But with that being said, that is all the time we have for this
That
evening,
is.
you guys.
Yeah. Hey, keep an eye out for our books. And hey, folks, just real quick, again, contact us on our Facebook page. If you want a book, if you buy one of our Trade Wind books, I will sign it and mail it. And if you get the $25 book, that will go into helping us produce our new book coming out.